Okay. Can you hear me? I can't hear you.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
You're no longer muted. You're just
Can you hear me?
quiet. Let's see. Maybe it's my computer though.
Okay, hold on.
I'm using my work computer, so. Okay.
Is that better?
Hi, how are you?
Okay. Hold on. Do you hear me now? I'm sorry, I'm on Joe's computer. Hold on one
I
second.
think it was my work computer was,
Okay, so is it okay now?
yes.
The audio is okay. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
How are
No, I'm all
you?
like, this is not like my area. This is the Joe zone. So I'm like,
Oh,
okay, we
the
think we're
show
okay.
zone. That's great.
Well, I mean, so no, I'm so happy to be here. It's in the, in the little cottage.
Oh, that's adorable.
And everybody else is in the house. So this is
Oh,
actually
perfect.
amazing. Like I can actually like be like alone and think and be for like an hour.
Nice.
I have
Oh,
two insane dogs. And Dean just got back from camp and
oh,
I mean from his like day camp. So
yeah, yeah.
anyway, how are you?
So cute. Good, good. Yeah.
So what room is this? I love the curtain.
Oh, thanks. I hope I don't offend anyone with my chinoiserie. This is our den, what was our den, but then Justin took it over during COVID to be his office. So I'm always like, glad you get the pretty space.
Yeah, exactly. I know. Like I know Joe gets like a whole building, and
Right.
I'm like, I have the dining room table maybe.
I know. I told the kids I was like, no talking, no, make sure the dogs don't bark, no meowing. And they were like standing outside the door, like, bawing and stuff for a while. I was like,
No, it's like, I mean, the Zooms I've done like in the house, I mean, you've been there, it's like, it's all like open spaces, so there's nowhere for them to go. So Joe's had to corral everyone downstairs,
right,
and I hear like, I mean, it's so distracting because like the dogs are whining and
right,
like,
right.
and Dean is like miserable. So
Oh,
anyway,
so are you spending the whole summer there?
so I think so, yeah. I mean, except for our, our trip at the end of the summer.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
and Joe is going back to the city like once a week. But otherwise we're out here. So
Good. How's it
yeah.
going?
It's great. I mean, as you remember last year, I didn't have a driver's license.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I was, do you remember that? I actually couldn't be up here alone without Joe because I was sort of a kept woman last year because I actually couldn't leave, but I now have my New York State driver's license, so I am
Oh,
free.
good for you.
Yeah,
Did you
I am
pass on the
free.
first time?
I passed, I remember we talked about this last year and I was so nervous about the test and I kept postponing it.
Right.
But then it's really like, because of like COVID and because the world's a mess, it's like months and months. If you like cancel it or postpone it, you have to wait like 6 months, like to get like another appointment. So anyway, so in the winter, in the middle of a snowstorm in the Bronx, I took it and passed it on the first.
You did.
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I know.
Yeah.
Like
I failed at the Bronx. I failed in Brooklyn maybe, and then I passed on Staten Island. This all came after 10 years of driving and passing on my first turn in Pennsylvania at age 16. So.
And it's I know the sort of the middle age like driving, like it was just the whole thing was just so humiliating. And I feel like I just passed it because she just felt like, because the instructor just felt like sorry for me. But I can't believe that you experienced like all of those nightmares, all of those places.
There's all this minutia that you're really tuned into when you're 16, but when you're like a fully formed adult and you've been driving for years, you're like, whatever, like no one does that. It's just a like rule. And like technically when there's a four-way stop and you're turning left, technically you're supposed to kind of like hover in the middle of the intersection before turning left. Like who does that?
Who does that? No one does that.
We all play chicken to get
Yeah.
like run over the cat to get my left-hand turn. Yeah, I think I was too ruthless or something. Yeah, there were, and then I think I like asked the guy like, oh, what's the speed limit here? Well,
Yeah. You just have
yeah.
to just be really, I was just like super like deferential and just kind of terrified. So.
Right. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh my gosh.
Big moment for us, yeah, for a then 49-year-old woman to get my driver's license.
So, but when we first moved to Connecticut, for the first like 2 years, I still do this sometimes. I would plan out my route so that I never had to turn left, because I hate left-hand turns.
Yeah.
So it would be this like in my mind, I would have to do all this like calculation of being like, well, if I go to this place first, then I get the stoplight, so I don't have to make a left-hand turn, like, in a random, like onto a busy road. And if
There
I do
you go.
then,
There you go. You're thinking strategically like a driver.
it preserved my brain.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So I've never led a webinar before. And when we go to the Q&A, I don't know if I admit people or if I just have them type I guess I can have them raise their hands and then admit them temporarily. Have you ever done this?
No, I've never actually, have I hosted something? I've like hosted things, but like actually no. I mean, I've like led Q&As, but like a bookstore, like they were the host, so I wasn't able to see. But so you're actually going to see the gallery view of the, if anyone shows up.
Oh no, four people are already in attendance, so we'll give it
all right.
minutes.
Great.
So yeah, I think that they can raise their hands and ask questions, but
okay.
So yeah, we'll wing it. Oh my goodness. All right, welcome to anyone who's joining us. We're going to give it another minute or two. It's only 7 o'clock, as you know, so we'll let the stragglers kind of wander their way in.
Crazy day for us to be talking about anything else other than what's going on in our country.
Yeah.
I mean,
I didn't catch much news. I saw that Ada Limon was appointed poet laureate. That was big news for me.
Oh, that I didn't. I was just obsessed with the hearings today.
Oh,
with the January 6th hearings. Just
yeah.
Pretty,
with the hard news. I was kind of
Yeah, I mean, what we have lived through as a country and what we continue to endure, it's just it's something else. It feels like, I don't know, maybe the conversation will lead in this direction tonight. I hope it doesn't actually, but it feels more kind of treacherous and dangerous actually in a way now than it did even a year ago or 2 years ago when Trump was in. It just it feels like such a crazy time.
Yeah, you need to sequester yourself away in the country and just put your head into a hole the way I did today.
I guess, I don't know, we got invested in a generator, so
you did?
Yeah, so when the zombie apocalypse arrives, we're in good shape.
Okay.
And my iced coffee.
Oh, good. All right. Welcome to everyone who's joining us. We will get started. Let's see. Let's start at 7:03, 7:01 right now. So, have you done many events this summer?
So I have done. I've done a couple events. Yeah, I've done a couple events. I have another one coming up with this new with an app called Alfie next month, and it's like and anyway, I'm like really excited about it. So that should be fun. But yeah, I'm so happy. I'm so happy to do this, and thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
And do you have weekly events at your library?
Not at the moment. We're going to work our way back up there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Are you doing anything in person?
We are. We're doing. Yeah, actually, if you ever want to sneak on over to Southport, we're kind of a library / museum, and we have a significant number of special collections. Actually, our special collections librarian is on right now. She's lovely. She started in February, so we have. let's see, Cecily, you can correct me. I think we have 4 Shakespeare folios. We have a number of incredible holdings and a lot of early Americana.
Oh,
So
great.
yeah, if ever. And Southport itself is the most picture perfect town. It's kind of one of those hidden gems that most people don't really hear about, but it's because there's not much commerce. It's like a tiny little commercial district,
Ugh.
kind of a boutique hotel, but and a few little restaurants, but it's really kind of quiet, like it's one of these places that I'm sure tons and tons of people would pass on 95 all the time and never really stop to explore. And if they did, they'd be absolutely astonished because there's a harbor, and it's just, so incredibly charming. So.
Oh, amazing, amazing. Well, I am so thrilled and honored to be here. So thank you so much.
Of course. Well, I guess we'll get started. I think we have some more people who are going to be joining us sporadically. I'm Jessie McEntee. I do communications and marketing at Pequot Library, and I'm also a writer. And I have been friends with Adrienne Miller. Has it been 12 years?
I think that sounds about right. My son, I track time, as we all do, track time by the age of my child, and my son is 10, and
Okay.
I knew you for a couple of years before that.
Right.
Yeah, we had an interesting mutual friend, and crazy 12 years. Here we are, and you lived in the city, and you had you're younger than I am, but you have older kids who are a few years older. So you were sort of, you were my kind of like mom, like one of my first sort of mom friends
Oh dear.
in the city, kind of told me where to go, what to do, when the sales were, where the sales were.
I'm glad I didn't scare you off of motherhood with the way I was handling it, because I definitely scared you off of the suburbs, because I remember coming into the city right after moving to Connecticut, and I was so bundled up in like every layer. It was a frigid day, and you were very elegant as always. I think you were wearing like Carolina Herrera or something, and I'm just like,
yeah, I'm sure.
I'm like burrowing down just to unwind all of the layers that I put on myself.
Hardly, but I mean, it's funny that you mention that now, because now, I'm in for the summer in Millbrook, and I mean, we're still in the city, but here for the summer, and it is so heavenly. I mean, it is just like heaven on earth this time of year. But in January, I mean, now I understand like what you kind of, with your LL Bean boots and your multiple layers. I mean, because it is so. I mean, like January, February here is it's a tough life. It really is. Right. And you also like. It's just like, and in the city, there isn't really kind of intense weather to deal with. It's just like, okay, can I get to an Uber in these shoes, and here it's like, will I die, like getting to my car and fall? Right. And, if I'm not wearing like these like amazingly tire, like, soles with these, shoes with these rugged tire like soles. Right. So, right.
Well, that's
it's a different lifestyle.
It is. And that's a good segue, because that kind of brings me to one of the first things I wanted to ask you about. So I haven't introduced you.
Oh, right.
My friend Adrienne Miller. My friend, we've established she's been my friend for approximately
We've established that we're friends.
Yes, we've established that we're friends.
That's about it.
Yeah, and Adrienne is a fantastic writer, a fantastic editor. She wrote, in addition to being the youngest female, you were the first female fiction editor, as well as the youngest
at Esquire.
At Esquire, right?
At Esquire. I mean, yes, I was cheap and available. I mean, that's the story of that sort of my brilliant career. I was cheap and available, but yeah. So when I was 25, and I mean. Now, like, how did this happen? I was hired as remarkably as a literary editor at Esquire. It was a very fancy sort of had been sort of in the heyday of Esquire, a very fancy job held by like legendary figures like Gordon Lish and Rust Hills, and then me, and then 25-year-old pipsqueak idiot me.
This is one of the things that cracks me up, and so for everyone who's listening. I've known Adrienne for 12 years. I didn't know like 3/4 of Adrienne's backstory until maybe like 2 years ago when her memoir was coming out, because she's so modest. I had no idea about,
I just hate it. It's kind of kind of like now so my memoir In the Land of Men was published. It was published 2 years ago, right before COVID, and it's not now. I'm like, that's so weird that I wrote a memoir, because it is so unlike me to talk about myself. Right. And that I actually was able to like drag out whatever whatever I was able to drag out and put on the page. Now I'm like, I guess that was a good idea to write this memoir.
Fantastic idea, because it's a wonderful, wonderful work. But yeah, it does crack me up that you did it, because you don't talk about your past very frequently in a social setting. And as I said, I learned so much about you. One thing I'm curious about, if we can kind of go way back, like, where did you get this idea about New York? I know you had a professor who suggested to you the Esquire or the GQ job, because otherwise you were going to go into academia. But like, what was it like to go from Ohio in the mid-90s? Like, what was your conception of the New York scene, or what did you anticipate? Did you go in kind of blind?
So I had an aunt, aunt, as we say in Ohio, aunt, as fancier people say, who lived in Brooklyn. Okay. In the 80s and early 90s. And I was fascinated by New York. I mean, but it seemed just like as remote as like Jupiter, you know? I mean, just, so I'm from, I was born in central Ohio, in Columbus. My dad worked for Goodyear. I'm going to read a little portion of my memoir about Akron. But you know, he was a tire guy, an engineer at Goodyear. And then we moved to Akron, Goodyear's headquarters, when I was like nine or 10. Right. And then it was like a Rust Belt sort of, like childhood, like very much like a, like bombed out sort of industrial landscape, left the cornfields, went to the Rust Belt. But I had this like very glamorous and sophisticated and interesting aunt who made a life for herself in New York. And every Thanksgiving I would go and visit her. And she would take me like from like when I like 11 to like 14, so like for like 3 or 4 years. And I would stay with her in it was like a railroad flat in Park Slope in Brooklyn. She was married. She just got married, and so she was a few years younger than my dad, so she seemed just much more just like urban and young and fun and sophisticated. And she would take me to the Macy's parade and take me to so this was like the mid 80s, take me to fabulous stores like Bendel's, which was then she called Henri Bendel. And that was before it was sold to the limited, and it was a fabulous like boutique, like the most like amazing, like one of a kind, like gorgeous, like couture clothes. And it's kind of like my introduction to the world of, to the world of like, urban sophistication. However, I didn't go to college on the East Coast. Didn't even like think of applying. I mean, I know like it's sort of like looking back, it's like so like what, like I applied to one college. I had fine grades, very good grades in high school, but applied to one college, Miami University in Miami, Ohio. Got an early decision. I just kind of didn't want to deal with the whole like college admissions process for some reason. So I went to stayed in state and went to flying school, but still felt kind of like disgruntled, like still kind of, like so many kind of Midwesterners kind of like felt kind of loved the place, but trapped there, felt that my better self was elsewhere, but yet there was something sort of so self-denying that was kind of like keeping me in Ohio. I mean, it's just everything kind of together, and I could like at that time in my life have seen myself had seen myself just kind of like living in Ohio for my entire life.
And that's what I think a lot of people who are from Ohio, and it's lovely there. My grandmother's actually from Akron. I love that. Was the burger place where you drove up and
Swenson's, the famous
yeah.
Swenson's. Yeah, I mean, it's both really beautiful and really, but also like a depressed economy too. It's both. I mean, I had a kind of upper middle class. My dad is an engineer, like sort of so white collar kind of like life there. But I went to a public high school, and and it was very diverse in terms of the socioeconomic status, right? I mean, and so there were lots of like kids whose parents at this time, like in the mid 80s, were laid off from their manufacturing jobs, like because then at that point manufacturing was moving out of Ohio. So it was like, it's an interesting kind of place. And I love growing up there, but also like, you're also very, growing up, in Ohio, you're both sort of, you've got a real chip on your shoulder, or at least like I did. Like I sort of, felt sort of smug in a way and like superior to the place, but not really anyway. But that's all sort of the psychological like part of growing up in that part of the country. And I had a professor my senior year of college who had a friend who was just like serendipitously an editor at GQ. And she was kind of a miserable, brilliant academic, but just kind of miserable sort of in her life in Oxford, Ohio, and said, whatever you do, don't become an academic, like talk to this guy, who's an editor at GQ, and just like get career advice from him. Of course, I'm like 22 and thinking like, why does he want to talk to me, like a student at Miami of Ohio, like, and like, it just seemed like preposterous to even like pick up the phone and sort of make that connection. I forced myself to do it, and it turned out that his assistant had just quit, like literally like had quit that day, and asked me, I was the right age, and I was, recommended, I guess, like fairly kindly recommended by my professor. He asked me if I wanted to interview for the job. This was like a couple of weeks before I graduated from college, and I flew out as soon as I could. And interviewed for the job. It's an editorial assistant job. I mean, very entry level job at GQ.
Those jobs are very hard to get.
But very hard to get, and I didn't think that I had a chance.
Right, in part because they're so low paying. I mean,
but because I didn't think I had a chance, I actually prepared for the interview.
I remember that description in your memoir. I was so impressed that you were very knowing at that age. I mean, I'm a couple years younger than you, but I remember my first job interview for publishing. I just breezed in and kind of thought like, because I had an English degree, it was a fait accompli, but you described locking yourself in the science library and just kind of
where the periodicals were, right? The microfiche were, because, but you went to Amherst. I mean, I went to Miami of Ohio, and I just felt I had to work like, like really, really hard even to like get myself like in the door and to even be able to like hold my own in this conversation. So I poured over old issues of this magazine of GQ. And if I felt I didn't have much else to offer, I would at least be an expert, on what this magazine had published, like in the last 2 or 3 years. And it turned out that all of the good pieces this guy I was interviewing with, and who became my first boss there, he'd edited, actually.
Wow.
Brilliant editor, and had great taste in writers, and happily enough that sensibility wise we shared a taste and a kind of a certain way of looking at the world, and so there you go.
Right, that's amazing. We have a lot of writers who have joined the chat. I want to ask you this question, and I know it's a hard question to answer because it's not a monolithic thing, but relating back to your experience with editing, because you say something about being surprised at the state of some manuscripts that were coming in from really well-known established authors. And I'm wondering, did you still kind of see the spark of genius in there a lot of the time? Or was it just kind of like, did you have the sense that, they had just been in the right place at the right time, and now that they were a big deal, they were going to get published?
I think I have a line in the memoir, and this applies mainly to like the unsolicited manuscripts I was saying, but that some people don't know, some people simply don't know how to present themselves in the world. And this was a time, and I'm talking now about like the physical like presentation of these manuscripts, because this was, to me, it doesn't seem this long ago, but in fact it was 20 to 25 years ago. The manuscripts were sent to me, were submitted to me, not email generally, not until sort of the end of my time at Esquire, which was 2006. So I was actually getting like bins, like U.S. mail service, like bins filled with manuscripts, and were some of them handwritten? In the late 90s, yes, some were handwritten on notebook paper. But in terms of like the actual like content of the manuscripts, they were all over the place, and I think that maybe, most certainly that, reading, and evaluating these manuscripts, and seeing that the quality was, all over the place, like it gave me a certain degree of confidence to think I could actually like write something on my own, like actually like maybe make a go of it as a writer. If these people thought they could, why couldn't I? But a spark of genius. This is another kind of, we could like talk about this like forever, but of course you can tell always, like within the first page, the first sentence, the first, like, does this person have a facility with language, like a certain sensibility, a way of looking at the world, like all that stuff. But sure, you can tell immediately if it's something that if it's got like, if it's got life or not, right?
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I think you have a great line in early in the memoir too about, great writers either allowing editors to have at it, or to kind of keep them from their worst tendencies, which I thought was also such a great nugget for people out there who are still, struggling to get into this world.
It was, now it's sort of like, with the benefit of hindsight now looking back on it, I almost now can't believe how much some of these writers trusted me. I was a very young editor. But I was unknown to everybody the first time I worked with them, right? But they were so, by and large, the more renowned, talented, successful, whatever you want to say about a writer, the more solicitous they were of me. Actually, it was sort of fascinating, and I feel very lucky to have worked with so many wonderful writers and absolutely wonderful people, and I learned so much from them, and learned, the main thing I guess that I learned how to sort of take pains and how to be, painstaking and exacting and a perfectionist. That's really, I guess like that's kind of my main takeaway. Just to the sort of the level of perfectionism.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. I struggle sometimes. For everyone who doesn't know me, which is 90% of the people in this chat, I teach writing classes, and I never want to discourage my students, but at the same time, the reality is, when you're trying to get published, especially in a publication like Esquire or GQ, you're basically, you have to think of yourself almost like an Olympic athlete. Like that's that's kind of the odds, and I think that you just need to constantly put in that much work and constantly revisit what you've created and have a sense of humor about it too. And that's a tall
And
order.
have a sense of humor about it. I love that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's pretty incredible. I definitely, you know, as someone who's done a lot of freelance editorial work over the years, I've seen a number of writers who are so fantastically talented, but they really bristle when you try to give them feedback.
But they're resistant to, right.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, and I'm sure I've done it too, so I shouldn't, but.
It's hard not to be defensive though, right? I mean, it's
yeah,
really,
your baby.
right? I mean, and like, what, like, obviously you reader, if you have a problem with this, you don't understand, then let me explain it to you. But it's not helpful to anybody, right? I mean, and I've also taught creative writing, and it's funny. I mean, it is so true that the younger, you know, that the student writers can be much more resistant, much more defensive than, you know, than somebody who's like been doing it professionally for like 30 or 40 years.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. Well, it's so good advice for all of the writers who are listening to us right now. I see a number of names that are familiar to me of people who are in that boat. So, so were there any, can you brag? Were there any writers whose careers you can kind of take credit for launching, or, you know, who's on your list of people you discovered?
Well, I published first stories by Nicole Krauss. Let me think. Heidi Julovitz, who's great. Adam Johnson. Now, Adam Johnson won a Pulitzer Prize for, what is his novel? It's called The Orphan Master's Son.
Wow.
I took a story of his when he was still a student actually at the University of Florida. Yeah, I think that was kind of crazy to see.
Wow.
Yeah. Let's see, early stories. Let's see. Yeah, those are the big ones though. I mean, Heidi Julovitz, that was her story on outtakes from the, what was it called? Outtakes from the Heidegger Krupnik wedding album. It ended up in like that in the best American short stories that year. And I think it won an O. Henry, maybe. You know, she was just a few years older than I was. So we were like approximately the same age. But it felt like such a triumph when I was, you know, and I was new there, to get in a story by a young, you know, by a young woman. And it had a very kind of, it was sort of fractured and kind of, it wasn't a sort of linear kind of chronological narrative. It was kind of, anyway, it was cool. That was kind of it's sort of one of my fondest feathers in my cap, if you will. So yeah, but then, I mean, but then I got to work with, like, you know, Don DeLillo and George Saunders, you know, I mean, so
yeah,
Arthur Miller. I talked to Arthur Miller on the phone.
Yep.
That's weird. I mean, and I can still hear his voice. It's Arthur Miller. Calling me. Amazing, just amazing. So
wow. Yeah, that's definitely a voice you do not forget.
No, you really don't. You know, and with somebody like him, I mean, I was so awestruck by him because I'm such a fan of plays and playwrights, and I mean, even I was almost more starstruck by, I think, by him than like by anybody. But just to think, oh my God, Willy Loman. This man, this author, who was certainly in his mid 80s at the time.
Right.
You know, I mean, it was very late in his life, and amazing, by the way, he was still writing short stories and submitting them to Esquire.
Wow.
But wow, he's creative Willy Loman. Unbelievable. Attention must be paid. I mean, if we could all just write one line like "attention must be paid."
Right.
Amazing. So.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. So I just have one David Foster Wallace question. So did you consider doing a roman class, or was it always going to be a memoir? Was In the Land of Men always going to be a memoir?
Yeah, so In the Land of Men is sort of my kind of journey from Ohio to New York, and then from GQ to Esquire, where, so we mentioned I was the literary editor for about 10 years. And at Esquire, I became close to David Foster Wallace, and he, in the second half of the book, is a conspicuous presence. Maybe now, in hindsight, maybe a little too conspicuous, but that's okay. The book is long done at this point. But did I consider writing it as in fiction? Sort of, I guess. I don't know, but it seemed so cowardly in a way, you know. You know, I just sort of start, you know, I had some sort of anecdotes, you know, and that where I was sort of, you know, thinking about for years about David and thinking about how to present them to the world if I ever did. And I just sort of started writing and just kind of noodling around, really, to just sort of see how it would go without any expectation or anticipation that it would turn into a book or a memoir. I was just sort of writing it really for my own, you know, just so I would just sort of have a documentary sort of, you know, memory of sort of what actually, you know, occurred between us. But anyway, I wrote it as a memoir. Whether that was, you know, a wise decision or not, I'm not. Still, the jury's still out on that.
Oh no, I think it was absolutely a wise idea. I was curious because your first published book, The Coast of Akron, was fiction. If anyone is not familiar with that, but with either of these two books, they're both fantastic. The Coast of Akron is more, there's a lot of wordplay. It's really fun. It's kind of tongue in cheek. So I was curious if that would, you know, to my mind, once you're a novelist, that would be kind of the route that you would just go. So I was curious about whether or not that was something.
But I'm so sort of in a sort of a novelistic way, I'm sort of so uninterested in my life. I mean, actually, it was you know, and I've been working on another novel for like forever and ever and ever that has absolutely nothing to do with my life. You know, it's sort of where I put sort of everything else that isn't me. You know, it's my way of kind of like pretend that novel. I mean, I know I've told you about this novel, but it's about like a musician, a classical musician. I am absolutely manifestly not a classical musician, but it's my way of kind of being an actor and pretending I'm someone else. I've also been working on a script for a while, and I have a which is a totally different and extremely fun, by the way. I would highly recommend try for creative writers out there, just sort of trying your hand at script writing. I just sort of wanted to see if I could do it. If you like writing dialogue, that a script can be your friend. And I am working with a producer now on it, and the producer actually, we just last week finalized a showrunner actually to help me develop this as a TV show. And this is a guy who's worked on, I don't know if I can say the name of the show, but it was just nominated for an Emmy for best drama this just today. It's a beloved show that's been on forever. Anyway, but I'm looking forward to learning a lot about a totally new discipline and a totally new way of writing. So
well, that's wonderful. I think that's great advice again for writers or other people who are listening who are also just lovers of books. But it's kind of a good reminder that we shouldn't confine ourselves to one genre, and as practitioners or as readers. And I love how you bring up the idea of writing as almost like acting. I think about this a lot. I think about, you know, writing is like this internal search or it's almost like sometimes you're building a movie in your head and then you're just transcribing it, but you're the one who's saying like how every motion or gesture is going to look. I think
no, and it's so true, and just kind of putting and creating like other characters and just kind of imagining how like not how I would feel if this happened to me, but how this actually how another person would feel if this happened to him or her. And I think it was, what's the Hemingway line, that it's that you're not writing characters, you're writing people, you know. And if you're writing, like, if you think of them as characters, then it's just dead. It's just dead on arrival. They're people.
Right. That's such great advice. I love it. Oh, wonderful. All right. Well, we've hit the 7:30 mark. So, Adrienne, are you ready to read for us?
So, you know, I can absolutely. I think that I'm going to read a few little disconnected segments, whether they add up to anything, or, you know, or make any sense as a whole. I actually don't know.
I'm sure they'll be lovely. And then afterwards, we'll do a Q&A. So whoever has burning questions to pose can.
Burning questions on this crazy day, or we could talk about the January 6th hearing too. So, all right, so I'm going to start with just a couple pages about what the thing everybody is like dying to hear about, I'm sure, Akron, Ohio, and the tire industry. So I apologize. That's where my mind is right now. The script I'm working on is set in Akron, and it's just kind of hard for me to sort of get out of it. In the mid-century, 40% of the nation's tires were made in Akron. When I was growing up there, Akron was pretty much a one industry town, and nearly all the parents of the kids I knew worked for the venerable tire companies, Goodyear, Goodrich, and General Tire. Here's something I learned early on. Corporations, for better or worse, run your life. Everything you had, everything you were, you owed to the company. You bought your house thanks to the largesse of the corporation. You bought a car thanks to the corporation. You raised a family thanks to the corporation. You depended on the company for everything. And if you weren't part of the company, what were you? The villain of my Northeast Ohio childhood was the late Sir James Goldsmith, the British billionaire and corporate raider, and allegedly Oliver Stone's interpretation for the character Larry Wildman in Wall Street. Goldsmith, steeringly referred to as Sir Jimmy in the Akron of my youth, owned nearly 12% of Goodyear's stock, and in 1986 attempted a hostile takeover of the company. This takeover bid was Akron's 9/11, an active war on us. The whole thing was shocking and terrifying, and during that terrible fall of 1986, I made my father completely nuts by asking him over and over if he was going to lose his job. He said he wouldn't, but the truth is that we all believed we'd be ruined. The people of Akron stood up to Sir Jimmy and fought back. They protested and petitioned. They put up signs in their yards that said, "Save Goodyear." They hilariously sent bags of rubber bands to Goldsmith's townhouse in Manhattan, merry fate being what it is. The man who wanted to take over the great rubber company apparently had a rubber band phobia. That is true. Ultimately, the company bought Goldsmith off. The takeover bid failed, and Goodyear survived and adapted, but went into massive debt. After Sir Jimmy, things were never the same in Northeast Ohio. Many people lost their jobs, lives were destroyed, and the forces of rage, revenge, and nihilism were set in motion. At my school from then on, bubbling poisonously away underneath everything like contaminated quicksand, was the whispered word, layoffs. It was then that I became, for the first time, aware of the concept of class stratification. There was now a discernible split between the kids with parents who had nerdy white-collar jobs at the tire companies and the ones whose parents had the manufacturing jobs. The kids with the sciencey job fathers and mothers, the engineers, statisticians, chemists, tended like me to come from elsewhere, and everything usually felt more secure, physically, I mean, psychologically, I mean. The men and women with the manufacturing jobs were generally from the big extended state. It just so happens that I'm friendly now with a man who considers Sir James Goldsmith his personal mentor. This guy really loved Goldsmith. He actually described Goldsmith to me as, quote, a sweet man And when he speaks of Goldsmith's human warmth, his wit and generosity, plus his daunting backgammon skills, it will always inevitably occur to me that we never have anywhere near a partial view on anyone. Yet, on the other hand, when thinking in a sentimental way about kings, it is dangerously easy to forget about their power and about the severed heads upon which they walk. And that is Akron for you. I think I shall skip ahead. So Jessie, how much time do you want to devote to the reading portion?
I think it's 7:40. I think we said that we would wrap up at like, 8:15. I think we have a captive audience, and they're eager to hear from you. So
as everyone will escape as I will to watch MSNBC or CNN about the 9/11. Okay, so I will. So here's a short section about sort of my deliverance to New York. Our destinies come at us in unlikely ways. We tend to over-dramatize our own agency. We like to attribute whatever success we've had to our own ingenuity, industry, brilliance, good looks, overall irresistibility, etc. But the truth is that luck is at least 80% of life, and maybe even more than that. In Renaissance drama, fortune is the principal force, the primary character that shapes human lives. It is not impossible that free will is an invention of the novelist who is in the interiority business. When I was 22, a week before my college graduation, I moved from Ohio to New York to interview for a job as an editorial assistant at the men's magazine GQ. Up until a few weeks before, I had been intending to go to grad school like everyone else. In my view, literature class was the only place to be. There was no right answer. There was no group consensus. You got to choose your own truth, and you got to grapple with one exemplary mind, the mind of the writer. And you learned to read novels. And when you learned to read novels, the actions in your own puny little life intensified and took on a very different sort of consequence. I like to read and I like to write, and grad school was the place in which both of those things could blamelessly be done. What harm could come of that? A lot, evidently. The professor tried to discourage me from the plan. Whatever you do, don't become an academic, she said. It was a month before my graduation, and she and I were standing in a hallway in the English department. You're too independent. The independent bit did not seem a compliment. The truth is that I was independent only insofar as I had approached my studies in a somewhat desultory fashion, until, that is, I started taking this professor's classes. She taught literature and women's studies, and I knew she was mine forever when just two things happened. When she announced to the class, just so you know, you're all being trained to be middle managers. And when, during the following class, she walked up to the blackboard and wrote these words, I can't go on, I'll go on. Second. She added there in the hallway, academia is a horror for women. My professor, it turned out, had this friend, and this friend had a friend. The friend's friend was an editor at GQ, and she suggested I give the GQ guy a call for what she somewhat extravagantly referred to as career advice. Of course, I had no career. This was not a call I wanted to make. Now, I know plenty of kids in college who worshiped at the altar of the glossy magazine, but I was not quite one of those. I considered myself too high-minded for the mainstream commercial magazine, and I wouldn't have been caught dead in high school with any periodicals other than my father's Foreign Affairs and, of late, his New Republics. But there was a catch. I was obsessed with, completely infatuated by fashion. And most of what I knew about fashion I had learned from reading magazines, alone in my room at home. I'd actually hated that I cared so much about clothing and considered it a potentially soul-deforming weakness. I also knew that I was quite dangerously enticed by fashion magazines' conspicuous consumption angle. So maybe my relationship with the glossy magazine might have more accurately been called love-hate. I did make that call. Turned out the GQ editor's assistant had quit, but I liked to be considered for the job. The interview date the editor gave me conflicted with my graduation. I knew this was my one shot and I took it. My one shot. That was it. My one shot. So my options now are to read about, let's see, men's magazine sexism section, or my encounter with Norman Mailer.
Oh,
The Norman Mailer is probably more interesting. I worry it's a little long. I will try to skip ahead. Not long after I started the job at Esquire, I went with a friend to a talk by Norman Mailer. The idea was for the friend who worked at the Wiley Agency, which represented Mailer, to introduce the grand old man to me after the speech. Mailer was, possibly after Hemingway, the fiction writer most closely associated with Esquire. He'd been regularly publishing in the magazine since the 50s, and he'd had a regular column titled The Big Bite. And there was an American Dream excerpt and excerpts from Harlot's Ghost, and there were features, most famously Superman Comes to the Supermart, about JFK in the 1960 Democratic National Convention, and Norman Mailer versus 9 writers, in which he was given 7 feature well pages to assess recent books by 9 rivals. Let us sample this beauty from the Bellow essay. Yet I still wonder if he is not too timid to become a great writer. In more recent years, Mailer had done an interview with Pat Buchanan, and I'm skipping ahead here, and an astounding, not in a good way, interview with Madonna, the introduction to which Mailer wrote in third person, and which contained the sentence, "Madonna, on the face of it, had to have an ego larger than his own. You don't even want to know how much he was paid for the piece. I saw the contract." Mailer had also appeared on the cover of Esquire a couple of times. His eerie resemblance on one of the covers to Gold of My Ear was not infrequently noted around the Esquire offices. Repeatedly directed toward me at work, like the plangent bleats of a foghorn, were the questions, "Who's our new Mailer? Who are our titans? Who are our titans?" They wanted big male writers of the Mailer school. Implicit in this line of thinking was that a writer with enough talent and charisma should be able to force the culture to care about novelists and novels again. The fault was with the writers, not with the world, in other words. And I suppose it was true that no one, except for David Foster Wallace at the time, was trying as hard and on such a heroic scale as Mailer, as Roth. As part of it, no one seemed to want it as much as they did. But how could a Mailer or a Roth or any communal national literature ever exist again? Those big grandiose books about America and Americanism couldn't be written today. As the country went more and more off the rails, we all did the sensible thing and retreated inside our heads and into university writing programs. And broadly, our novels were now internal monologues, the dream world of the self. I loathe Mailer. Yes, I would have reluctantly conceded that the Executioner Song was a mere masterpiece, and I appreciated that The Armies of the Night was in fact a very good novel. But I wouldn't be the first to point out that the prose was ludicrously overwritten and that the whole Mailer novel writing stance, man asserts his manhood by writing manly novels, was preposterous. I would further argue that his novels have even barely made a dent at all in American fiction. His early nonfiction is another story, however, but novelists want the novel to be king, not the non-novel. And pieces like Superman actually probably did change literary fiction forever. Literary journalism forever. Not the now reported stories could be flamboyant and oracular and ridiculous and sound like novels. Skipping ahead a bit, what I couldn't accept about Mailer, how could a writer whose work be so pugnaciously sexist be widely considered great? How could this even be allowed? But this probably wasn't even an argument I needed to have once I ventured away from the Esquire editorial offices. There were no young Mailer fans, and I'd never heard anyone of my age mention his work ever. And that was progress of the sort, I guessed. Mailer's talk that night, a stop in the publicity campaign for his latest novel, The Gospel According to the Sun, was at a school on the Upper East Side. The typical Mailer loyalist out in the audience looked as if he died about 10 years before. the novel, The Autobiography of Jesus, Mailer as God. On stage, Mailer, who had a weirdly affected Brahmin accent, held forth about God, Jesus, Christians, and Christianity as if he alone had the special wisdom monopoly on these topics and all others. It seemed to me even then dangerous for a writer to regard himself as grandee. The writer's concern should always be with getting to the truth. And how could you get to the truth of the story if you are the story, not the one standing outside of it? In his irritatingly excellent book, The Spooky Art, Mailer in fact acknowledges his early fame as a central tragedy of his career. Never get too comfortable in the temple. This was another message in a bottle I'd send my future self. During the book signing portion of the evening, as my literary agent friend and I advanced toward this terrifying white cannonball, it occurred to me that there was nowhere else I wanted less to be. I had in my brain the demented bravado of advertisements for myself, a book Esquire had excerpted, as Germaine Greer had written, and The Prisoner of Sex had written of The Prisoner of Sex and My Mailer Problem. Every page bespoke the terrors of the dying king. When my turn in line with Mailer came, I'm sure I blurbled something to him as nuance-free as, hey, you should write for Esquire again. As a matter of fact, that is exactly what I said. Mailer's blue eyes considered me with distaste. After a rich pause, he intoned, I feel about Esquire the way I feel about an ex-wife. I don't care. Sometimes in life, things can be the best and the worst at the very same time. This particular encounter was an example of this phenomenon. The following day, I shared the sad tale of Mailer's swiftly terminal response to Dave Eggers. Dave was an editor at Esquire, whose office was next to mine. I stood in Dave's office navigating the many empty Snapple bottles on his floor. He would usually, but not always, arrive in the office sometime before noon. In memory, he is always in shorts. Based upon my close readings of his magazine, Might, whose sensibility lay somewhere between The Onion, National Lampoon, and Letterman, I probably would have pegged Dave as a manic prankster with a hand buzzer built into his palm. A real madcap, in other words. I would have been wrong about that. Dave was jangly, restless, supernaturally confident, cantankerous when necessary, well-meaning, and fixated on the idea of integrity, his own and everyone else's. He would spend one somewhat in battle gear at Esquire. I never really understood what his job there was. I'm not sure he did either. Anyway, I always enjoyed getting his take on things and typically felt that his overall worldview was in alignment with mine. In the case of my Mailer flop, however, he did not supply the response I'd wanted. He shook his head slowly, very slowly. You, sister, Dave finally declared, are a dork. And that is where I was.
Oh,
you're a dork.
Oh my goodness.
Which I was. I can't believe I said to Mailer, you should write for Esquire again. And just completely destroyed me with, I feel about Esquire the way I feel about an ex-wife. I don't care. It's a perfectly legitimate response, actually.
Right. Hilarious. Oh, and I was watching one of your interviews the other day where you were talking about a Dave Eggers moment where you discovered that he made more money than you did.
Oh yeah, I think I have a thing about that in the book. We were in a, and not that you talk, I mean, you never talk about, how much money you make, right? I mean, and I certainly never knew how much Dave, my best friend at work, what his salary was. And we were in a cab together, and we got out, and he paid the. This was like so long ago that this was before New York City taxi cabs took credit cards, and and in order to get anywhere in the city, you just had to have like a $20 bill. Remember those days? And he paid for the cab, and he was getting his 20 out of his wallet, his pay stub. literally fell out of his wallet, and it fell down onto the floor of the cab. And I picked it up, and of course I looked at it, because who wouldn't? And it was literally twice my salary.
Wow.
Literally twice. We were approximately the same age.
Yeah. Did you ever?
Anyway, of course I never mentioned it to him, and he was just like, well, took it, grabbed the trash from the floor. But I mean, yeah, that was just like, okay, that happened. Interesting.
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating to me. I went into book publishing after college. And I think book publishing, we had more female editors, but the publishers were almost all male.
Right.
But yeah, I love so much of what you talk about in your memoir about, as this young woman, this outsider who eventually becomes an insider, but you had no connections beyond what the professor provided for you. You're in this big city by yourself, and you're surrounded by all of this constant sexism. And I'm just wondering, how much did you just normalize? I mean, I don't think you had any female mentors who were kind of normal, telling you that this isn't normal. Or really.
No, I had no female mentors, and I had interns and assistants who worked for me. I mean, some of them, I have a thing about this in the book, some of them were paid and some of them were not. It was all totally arbitrary. They were, but no, I mean, none of them were full time. It was like an hourly thing if they were paid. But I surrounded myself with women because I needed to. But
right.
these were like, ostensibly my assistants. Most of them became my good friends. Yeah, no, I didn't have anyone saying like, you march in there and you tell your boss that you need to make what the man who is your age is making. I mean, I sort of didn't know how to. I navigated the situation sort of as best I could. I've been, in various interviews I've done, women, particularly younger women, have taken me to task for sort of not sort of, for what accepting sort of, the sexism of the world around me. But I mean, for women who are like 20 years younger, it's hard to like explain or describe, like, this was the world that we came up in.
Yeah.
This was, I mean, the word that we throw around now is normalized. I mean, it was normalized. It was life.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely. Even in book publishing,
yeah.
right, where there were female editors who were senior to me, they weren't mentors. They were looking out for themselves. And some of them were very but no one was certainly no one was pulling me aside and saying, here's how to advocate for yourself. That wasn't a thing.
Totally. No, never.
Right.
Never.
And some of them were actually more scathing even than
Yeah, I would know, because at Esquire, I'm just trying to think, like, all of the women worked they were in art in the art department or fashion. I think there weren't even any like women in other like roles of power, positions of power there at the time. I mean, it's great. It's really, it's pretty, it's the sort of the org chart, there sort of the sort of breakdown of it, like 20 years later, it would be a very different situation, now, and I'm sure it is, right?
Let's hope.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's open the floor up for questions. I've never done a webinar before like this. I think if you raise your hand, I can let you speak. Or if you want to type a question into the chat function, that's another way to go about this. But let's hear from our participants. Anyone have a question? No. Maybe while you're formulating your questions, I can ask you, Adrienne, who are you reading these days? Who do you really admire?
So I actually just read the most amazing novel, which everyone has to read, by Vanessa de Salca, called The Great Offshore Grounds. It is amazing. It came out maybe, I don't know, like a year and a half ago. I mean, so it's not like fresh off the press, but she's amazing. It's hilarious. Her voice is incredible. It's sort of it's a buddy comedy set on the ship. But the buddies are our two sisters, and they're both like, they kind of hate each other. And it's just hilarious. Everyone needs to read it. And she's so great. Again, it's called The Great Offshore Grounds. And she's also so great in writing about class and money, which is something that's really hard to write about and very few people do well. So highly, highly recommended.
Oh, good. Well, thank you for the recommendation. So Melissa, I think I know which Melissa it is. She's a friend. Melissa was wondering what's next for you.
So I think I mentioned earlier a script that I'm writing, and and if all goes well with this showrunner I've been paired with, we will, along with the producer, present it to studios. So fingers crossed. But it's been a fun process.
Does that process typically, is that, I mean, I guess is it quicker than the book publishing process, which can.
So what I love about it now is that it is, it's collaborative. I mean, honestly, I've been lonely. I mean, I wanted to like work with like other people, but still like thought about like, how do I write? How can I write, but also like write, with other people in a sort of like in a team kind of like setting. And I started like a year ago, started writing the script really just as a way to kind of get meetings with producers without any hope that the spec script would actually like get me in fact a producer and and a showrunner. But I've been really lucky, and I just kind of love, and I'm just like really enjoying the collaborative aspect of actually having someone else to talk to about character, about story, about plot, about like, okay, so what are we like really doing, with this, like this character who like apparently murders someone after chopping down like a sacred tree on the property. Is that like really something that we want to put in the script? Maybe that's not a good idea. But I mean, it's actually, it's with an editor, I mean, I've had like pretty good editors, but you're still, you're a lone wolf.
Mm-hmm.
But it's nice to have somebody else to like to bat around ideas with, and also to complain to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Somebody who's going through exactly what you're going through.
Definitely. I'm so sorry about the dog barking in the background. I tried to ensure that there'd be no noises.
No, we're all dog people here.
That's
I have two crazy ones, but I'm in a little like cottage, like that's just right across from my house. So that's why you don't hear the dogs. I'm sure they're going crazy. And when I go back to the house, there will be hell to pay. I don't even want to think about like what I'm going to go back to. But
right.
No.
So it's interesting that you mentioned the collaborative aspect. I remember reading an article a few years back about how a lot of novelists and writers were going into the television world because of that, because they wanted to be part of a team and they wanted to have other people to bounce ideas off of. And I mean, this is a shameless plug because I'm not as discreet as you are, Adrienne, but you can get the same thing from a writer's workshop potentially if you're not lucky enough to, hit it big and get the producer.
True. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we have this impression that writers work independently alone, and they're just sequestered away, and they're content to be with their own thoughts all the time. And I think the opposite is oftentimes true. And it's probably, it's exceptional when you run across someone who actually does prefer to just kind of go it alone.
But but writing workshops and MFA programs too are, I mean, what a gift actually. I mean, to have that, to have that community, but also to have, particularly like with an MFA program, to have the time to write. Mm-hmm. I mean, I never did that. I'm sure that many people who are watching tonight probably took that route, and I'm kind of envious of it, to have been given that gift of a couple of years to do nothing other than to write. Seems like pretty magical.
Mm-hmm. You have incredible discipline because you produce so much on your own, or largely on your own. Do you have a few readers in your realm, or
I have a couple of readers. Yes, I do. I mean, and they're tough readers with kind of built-in bullshit detectors, absolutely. But I sort of keep things to myself until I feel that it's pretty complete, so, which, in a big project like writing a novel, like I'm very, very slow. That's still sort of years on one's own,
Yeah.
But I'm curious about, like, so in your writing workshops, are you also presenting work that you're writing?
No, I don't present my own work. No, it's my students' work. They read 5 pages aloud a week and then receive feedback on the spot, which is loads of fun and definitely keeps me on my feet.
That's a lot. 5 pages is a lot.
Yeah, well, it's great. It keeps them accountable. And some of
Absolutely.
them, I have a woman who's been working with me for 7 years, and she's on her 3rd novel. She's moved into cozy mysteries after writing thriller.
Amazing.
A couple students have finished their entire projects with me, which is really, really exciting.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, it's lots of fun.
Yeah, I loved, before I sort of after Esquire, before I had my son, I taught creative writing for a couple of years at the University of Pennsylvania and other places.
Yeah, you were at Penn and you were at Haverford when I first met you.
I was at Haverford and Bryn Mawr. Don't even ask me, because I lived in the city. I lived in New York,
Right.
and but I kind of, I started teaching first at Bryn Mawr, and then they're kind of, they're all sort of in the Philly area and all kind of know each other and connected. And so then I presented myself as sort of available and willing to take the Amtrak twice a week, from the city. And I loved it. And the purity of the experience, I thought, was just really what could be better, right? I mean, when the students are actually not defensive, right? And actually open and are there because they want to get better, and that's all they want. They want to get better and want their work to be better. And you actually see throughout the course of the semester, right, the work changing and improve. It's a beautiful, magical thing. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm muting myself because of the dog's continued barking. It looks like we have another Michael. Hi, Michael. Oh, you're muted. Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just I'm tuned in about 15 minutes after this started, so I don't know if my question was answered before, but I'm wondering, since the memoir is written about 14 or 15 years after the experience, when did you decide to write it, and B, how different do you think it would be if you wrote it back then, closer to your tenure at Esquire?
I think that meaning sort of only comes in time. I mean, it's something, when you're going through an experience, right, it's sort of like difficult to sort of draw the larger kind of like, more profound like meaning from it, right? So I knew that I needed that time. And I just, particularly the parts about in the memoir having to do with David Foster Wallace, I mean, I just wasn't even ready to address, because, he, as we know, I mean, died in a really horrific, tragic way. And it was just, those of us, I think, who are close to him, are kind of like, at least like my sort of mode of dealing with it was just to sort of shut down. So I needed the time and the space to sort of like to process the grief and the anger and all of that. So, I mean, yeah, God knows what I would have written at the time. I'm just really, really glad that I didn't. I'm glad I waited like 10, 15 years to actually say what I needed to say. In 10 or 15 years, I'm sure I'll arrive at some different conclusions about that time in my life.
Thank you.
So following up on the question, hi Michael, by the way, good to see you. Well, I'm not seeing you, I'm seeing your name, but anyway, following up on that question, Adrienne, I know you said in another interview that you left Esquire because it was getting harder and harder to place short stories. and before, I guess you had had the back page and kind of had, you felt like you had a lot more leeway. So I'm wondering, like, at what point in the process did you finally start to think of yourself as more of a writer than an Esquire editor in order to make that leap?
So I started Esquire, oh my God, it was 25 years ago. It was 1997. And it was still sort of looking back on it. Esquire was still in its literary heyday, and and it's remarkable to think about, but we were frequently publishing even 2 short stories a month. So I had one long form feature length short story in the magazine, and also the back page. They let me do it was a 650 word short story on the back page. If we had been able to keep up that pace, publishing 2 short stories a month, I could have stayed there forever. But of course, the world changed, right? And the internet came and subsumed everything. And and God bless the New Yorker for still publishing short stories in the actual printed magazine. I don't know if any other magazines still do. I know the Atlantic publishes fiction, but on the website. There was just not, the job was sort of changing, sort of beneath my feet. I was also responsible for the book excerpts in the magazine, and also the book coverage in the magazine, the book reviews, and I also wrote book reviews. But it just kind of organically sort of happened during my kind of decade there, right? And it was, and I started writing a novel, I think, in about maybe like the year 2000 or so. And I had been there for 3 years at that point, and then the novel was published by FSG 5 years later. Yeah. It just, I sort of considered myself somebody who had a kind of a sort of a modest facility with the written word. I mean, I knew I was no sort of, Arthur Miller or David Foster Wallace, but I thought, I maybe had sort of something, to contribute. And I started, and like the memoir and like the script that I'm working on, I just, you just kind of start, right? Start with a blank page, and you just kind of chip away at it every day, and just kind of, it's a hobby at first. And you see where it goes, and then it's a project, and then it's an obsession. So, but I never sort of had this idea in my head, that I want to be a writer with a capital W, and I want to be like an author. I mean, it just seemed, again, getting back to the self-denying, industrial Midwesterner, it just seemed far too like a different planet. Like, how do you become an author? How do you become a published writer? I had no idea. And even, working at Esquire, it still seemed, as the literary editor of Esquire, it still seemed kind of, it just seemed as remote as, as a different galaxy. But it's not really, because it's actually very, it's just a workaday kind of life, isn't it? I mean, you just sort of sit down every day, unglamorously, and just peck away. And that's what you do. And that's what everybody does, right? That's what Don DeLillo and Martin Amis also do, right? I mean, just every day, sit at your computer, or the old timers who are still writing on legal, yellow legal pads. There's still some of those. And just see what you come up with at the end of the day. And then just the next day, even if it sucks, just go right back at it.
Let's see, we have another question. First of all, I think you're selling yourself short by saying that you have a modest facility with words, but we certainly want all of the participants to go out, if they haven't yet read The Coast of Akron or your memoir, In the Land of Men. I'd say they display a lot.
Thank you for the plug, Jessie. Thank you.
Of course. Again, I'm the shameless one. I'm the shameless one with the barking dog.
So I know that in the Rate My Zoom room, a lot of the writers in their, when they're in their in their studies or in their libraries, they have their books sort of displayed behind them, but I'm not the window. I don't know, maybe we should have put a book in the window. But anyway, thank you for the plug.
Of course. So let's see, Sharon is asking, Sharon kind of posed a long question here, so I'm gonna skip a little bit. So she says, aside from the salary difference, you seem to have mostly gratitude for the experience at Esquire, that you're mostly treated with respect by your male peers, which I can answer this. I can answer this for Adrienne. I can be her PR person tonight with the shameless plugs. But the book absolutely goes into a lot of sexism. But anyway, I'll let you. I won't put more words in your mouth, Adrienne.
Oh yeah, it's funny. I was sort of deliberating between like reading the mailer section and a section which the Paris Review actually excerpted like the sexism at the magazine, and just kind of it was just a couple pages like the ruthlessly horrendously sexist stuff that like the men at the magazine and sort of and kind of in the milieu of the magazine like said to me. Unbelievable. But oh yeah, I mean it was the 90s. I mean it was outrageously sexist.
Right.
So it was
to paint a picture of the 90s in publishing was still the boozy lunches at Elaine's. I mean, that was still kind of going on, right?
The boozy lunches at Elaine's, and this is also the era of the Lad magazine, the rise of like Maxim and Gear and like what I just forget what. But the magazines I worked for, and at the time I worked for them, were competing against that bullshit. I mean, and so it was. Oh yeah, and I have in the book a thing about one of the last straws for me was Sigourney Weaver was on the cover of the magazine. And by the way, amazing that Sigourney Weaver was on the cover of Esquire. But Sigourney Weaver had at that point in her life just turned 50 and looked great and was in like a huge movie. Was it maybe it was Avatar at the time? But the issue she was placed on the cover for was, get ready, the age issue.
No.
And and literally there was like the feature was devoted to a package called How Women Age. Seriously.
Oh.
It was so like, and just looking at like, and like, this is like, as I'm thinking, however old I was, like 30, I don't know, like thinking like, this is like the best that we can hope for, like to be, like not to be like treated as an equal or, or the fabulous like Sigourney Weaver, who was just like brilliant and world famous and gifted and just like so cool and whatever. And she is represented only by her age in the magazine. And that was kind of one of it was like, I don't know if I can keep doing this job anymore.
Yeah. I do wonder what the experience is like for young women today going into that world, even though it's contracted so dramatically.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about everyone has to have dinner and watch MSNBC and CNN, but I mean, we could talk about Me Too and how, and how both amazing and problematic Me Too has been, and amazing in that it identified, a huge problem of victimization of women, right? And the, impunity of power of various powerful men, but the problem of, the sort of, and now the ferocious backlash to Me Too that we're seeing, right? And in fact, to feminism. Probably too late in the day to get into that, but very, very depressing, actually very demoralizing. The beginning of Me Too, do you remember how fun it was? Like in about 2017, the fall of 2017, and like every day, like another guy would go down, like Matt Lauer, so great, I mean, Harvey, obviously, but Charlie Rose, and all these guys, and it was just like one after another, and we don't miss them, and they're gone, and it's just, but the problem then became, and the backlash has a lot to do with the lack of due process, right? I mean, that it wasn't I wasn't set up for, we were cavalier about the whole kind of aspect of due process, right? So,
right.
and also that all crimes were kind of collapsed. The crime, sexist crimes of different degrees were all kind of collapsed into like the same thing. That was a problem with it, but we have, I don't know. It's a very, very, very depressing time for a given row, and and the demonization of Amber Heard, and I mean, and the fall of Me Too and everything. It's
when you were writing In the Land of Men, how did that fall in terms of Me Too? Did Me Too force you to revisit the material?
It would have been a very different book with a very different title. I think it was written kind of in the midst of Me Too. It's funny. I sold the book as as usually is the case with nonfiction books, as a partial, as just a couple chapters and a proposal, and sold it in the fall of 2016. And my kind of idea was kind of women's empowerment. Hillary was clearly going to be the president, and then boy, that didn't happen, and boy, something else entirely happened. And then Me Too, and I felt empowered to kind of, to talk about things that had been sort of, repressed as, and that had, shameful kind of, encounters and experiences,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Adrienne, this has been such a fascinating talk. Let's see, any final questions from people who are still tuned in and listening? All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and for being here on this really yet another crazy, momentous day in in the history of our country. And this, my sort of little 90s literary jaunt now seems a bit, sort of antiquated, or kind of, in some ways sort of harmless, but it's been fun walking down memory lane with all of you lovely people. So thank you very much. And thank you so much, Jessie.
Oh, well, we'll get you to the Pequot Library soon, and anyone who's tuning in who's familiar with the Pequot Library will come visit us.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll have you in person soon. So thank you.
I would love that. Love it. Thank you so much.
Everyone read Adrienne's wonderful writing, and we look forward to seeing your forthcoming projects. I'm sure they're going to be fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much, everybody.
All right.
Really enjoyed it.
Have a good night.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.